Well, if you have an issue with public housing, if you have an issue with your local council, if you have an issue with a statutory authority that falls within the remit of the Victorian Ombudsman, she's here this afternoon, Deborah Glass, taking your call. Deborah Glass, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Nicole.
And welcome to Ballarat.
It's wonderful to be back.
It's been a while.
I think since before COVID we were trying to work out the last time I was here, but we've chatted, of course, since then. But it's great to be in the studio.
It's wonderful to see you back. So, public housing has been in your sights in the last few months, particularly how complaints are handled by tenants. We've seen the rise of a lot of black mould in properties across regional Victoria. Is this an issue which is also happening in public housing?
Yes, very much so, and we're getting quite a few complaints about it. Public housing complaints has always been a part of the regular workload of the Ombudsman's office, and one of the things that we've been doing a lot about recently is trying to work with the department, with the Office of Housing to get them to do it better. Because people are telling us, look, either they're afraid to complain because they're afraid they're going to lose their housing, or they think nothing's going to happen. So we're working with the department and trying to make sure that we can get them to respond to people's complaints, because they do tend to respond to us, I'm happy to say.
Yes, but you have power, you see, and when you're a welfare recipient living in a public housing block, you have no power.
Exactly, and that's what the Ombudsman is for. Yeah. So but it's an important area of focus for us. So if you're not getting anywhere in your dealings with the housing agency, then come to the Ombudsman, because we do get results.
What are they telling you about the sort of conditions that they're being forced to live in?
Well, we get complaints about, black mould is certainly a major recent one that's been, particularly with the weather we've been putting up with in the last few months. That's really been shocking. But public housing complaints can cover a whole range of areas. Neighbour disputes is a big one, where some of the people who go into public housing are there because they're fleeing family violence. There may be somebody else who's nearby who engages in antisocial behaviour. It's complicated, and they don't often get sorted out as effectively as they might. So that's not an uncommon one. Maintenance requests, probably the biggest single issue we deal with on a regular basis. My boiler has failed, there's no hot water, nobody's fixed this, or they say they fixed it, but really it's not. The problems they have with tradesmen seem to be constant.
You also had an issue with one tenant who had electrical wiring problem, I understand, in her home, and nothing was done until her child was electrocuted.
Oh, that was a terrible case. We highlighted in the report I put out some months back into the way complaints are dealt with. One of the things we found is this poor woman was complaining to the department about the wiring in her public housing flat, getting nowhere. And I mean, she wasn't able to wash her children's clothes because of the way the wiring was failing, and it wasn't until her daughter was electrocuted and ended up in hospital that something finally happened. So it was a really horrible state of affairs. And part of the problem was that different parts of the housing weren't speaking to other parts. So her complaint wasn't being appropriately escalated.
There seems to be, though, this constant overlay of, well, we can get away with ignoring these people, so we will.
Well, there are a lot of good people who try and do the right thing. I genuinely believe in the public service. Yeah. And I'm sure that's equally true of the Office of Housing. But there's huge demand, there's no consistency, and there's a sort of lack of responsiveness on the front line. So, one of the messages in that report is, if you invest in good complaint handling on the front line, you will actually reduce complaints to the Ombudsman, and you'll increase public satisfaction.
1300 303 468. If you have a question for the Victorian Ombudsman, she is with us this afternoon. James is in Macedon. James, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Nicole. How are you?
Good. You're through to
the program.
You're through to Deborah Glass.
Oh, hi, Deborah.
Hello, James. How can I help?
I'm a local farmer up in the Macedon Ranges. Just got a question around, planning policy and, the release of, draft planning policy to the public that haven't actually engaged with landowners in the sort of early stages of those, ideas and concepts. The most recent one that I'm trying to deal with at the moment is an amendment C145, which is basically the water catchment up here. So the council, along with Collarbone Water, have come up with an idea to simplify everything, and there's a lot of parts to this amendment that are really good. It'll reduce the amount of permit applications, but they've gone sort of one step further, and they're trying to include fencing as a trigger for a planning permit if it's within 10 metres of a waterway. Now, that's not just a river or stream, it's any blue line on a map, which really doesn't work in terms of farming or, replacement of fencing
right.
and that sort of stuff. So basically, under Section 8 of the Water Act, we have a right to access for stock and domestic purposes. So my question really is, how can these organisations enforce planning permits for something that we have, as of right access to on our farms?
Well, complicated question, and I probably can't give you a simple answer to it, because it will depend on who's the agency, what decisions are they allowed to make under their legislation, what discretion do they have under their legislation, and I can't claim to be an expert on the Water Act. What we would do, and I encourage you to ring my office on this one and get somebody to talk it through with you. I'm going to give you the number in a moment. But the broad answer would be, we'd be looking at who's made the decision here. Is it the council? Is it the water agency? Is it the interaction between the two? And is it a decision that's open to them to make? So that's really the question that we would be looking to examine.
The decision hasn't been made. Obviously, the documents have just been released for...
So they're consulting at the moment?
Yeah, for public response. And I waited till the very end of, the last day to make my submission, and I was submission number 7. So, the changes would affect, hundreds, if not thousands of farmers and landowners
right.
in the district. And I'm just wondering, is the system broken that all of this can be done by these agencies on our behalf, then released to the public, in the hope that it'll get through, and these, ideologies and agendas, just slip through the net and, just make farming and life in general more and more difficult for everybody?
Well, I really hope the system isn't broken, but otherwise... That sounds like a bit of a rhetorical question, James. So, but what it sounds like to me is that you've got something that's in the consultation stage, which is, I assume they're required to do under the Act. So
yep.
you've put in your submission, good for you. I hope you encourage anybody else who's concerned to do the same, because people tend to respond in consultations to the weight of numbers. So you need to see what happens as a result of the consultation. But if they're consulting as they're supposed to, and it's a decision that's open to them to make, then there's probably not a lot you can do about it.
Okay, interesting.
Is it a decision that they are open to make, do you think, James?
I'm not sure. I mean, my real concern is, like that there's just been no initial consultation with, even fencing contractors and how that'll impact their businesses.
What's the actual impact on the locals of the rezoning?
Well, look, if I want to put fencing in, I'm not sure whether this applies to the replacement of existing fencing, but, agricultural fencing is something that needs to be, maintained and replaced on an ongoing basis for various reasons. But, if we're needing to then apply for a permit, which potentially could take, 6 months or whatever, like potentially, the council is going to be inundated with hundreds or thousands of applications for fence repairs, and they're just not going to be able to keep up with that, and all their rates money is just going to be, spent at VCAT.
Well, I would really hope if something is not practical that you and others say so and that they listen.
Yeah, well, we'll do that. So hopefully they will. I just was interested in, Deborah's thoughts on the process leading into these projects.
Look, good luck with it, James. But if you do want to talk to my office, which you can do at any time, our complaints line, which is open 9 to 5, is 1800 806 314. And they will happily talk you through what they can and can't do in looking at this issue.
Okay, beautiful. Thanks very much, Deborah. Appreciate it.
Good luck,
You're very
James.
welcome.
Thank you. 1300 303 468. If you have a question for the Ombudsman, Stephen is in East Gippsland. Hi, Stephen.
Hello, how are you,
Yeah,
Nicole?
good, thank you. Good, you're through to Deborah Glass.
Hello, Stephen.
Yes.
How can I help?
Well, I'm having trouble getting the council to understand that everybody can't just have a credit card. The reason I'm ringing is I like going over to Raymond Island on the ferry. Now, they charge $10 for that, which is reasonable. I've got no problems with that. But they will not accept cash. It has to be on a credit card.
Really? Well, I think you can complain about that one, because that doesn't strike me as being reasonable.
I have complained about it, and they will not do anything about it. 4 times I have been refused entry to the ferry because of it. I even had a certificate from the council that was sent to me with me rates, giving me free access to Raymond Island for one journey, and they just said, we don't accept them anymore.
Can I give you the number of my office, and would you like to give them a call? Because I think, we might like to have a chat to the council about that.
Yeah. Is it legal for them to say we don't take cash?
Well, it's I try not to give a straight opinion on something where I haven't got all the information, but I can tell you that my gut feeling around this is that we want to make some inquiries about that, because I don't think it doesn't seem to me to be reasonable to assume that everybody owns a credit card.
Yeah, well, so I'm a pensioner, I don't have a credit card.
Well, I think that's a policy that is worth taking a look at. So 1-800, if you want to give us a call, 1-800 806 314. That's the number of my office.
Is it?
1-800 806 314.
314. All right, I will give your office a ring.
I think that's a really interesting
when I brought it up with
Yeah.
them, I got told under no circumstances were they interested, get off the phone.
Wow.
Well, look, we know with the last few years of COVID, there's been a lot of policies where we don't take cash anymore. So, but I think it's certainly worth making a few inquiries into, and give us a call and we'll do that.
Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Stephen. 1300 303 468 if you have a question for Deborah Glass. If that is an accurate reflection of what the council is doing, does that not exclude the elderly and extreme low-income earners from being able to utilise that service?
Absolutely. And what I was thinking about when I was listening to that question are people who are required to do things online. There was so much over with COVID, with the business grants, where you had to apply online, and there were lots of people who didn't have access to the internet or didn't know how to use it and made mistakes and were penalised for it. So there is a kind of assumption in the world we live in today that everybody has access to smartphones, everybody can get online, everybody has a credit card, and that's just not right.
No, and it means that those who are the most disadvantaged get bulldozed.
It does.
Out of the way.
And that one of the things that my office has to do from time to time is point this out.
I'm speaking to Deborah Glass, the Victorian Ombudsman. If you have a question, 1300 303 468, or you can text on 0467 842 722. Just going back to the public housing, Deborah Glass, the ABC report team of Laura Mayers, Andy Burns and Charlotte King have just done an expose in relation to this sort of explosion of mould in homes across the state, particularly given the flooding experience that we are seeing. We have spoken to flood victims who say they are going to take their council on over this, and that the council has a role in emergency management and where the levy banks go, and ensuring that the extent of the catastrophe as has been experienced should not have been as bad as it is. Can you tell me where your office sits in that equation?
Well, it depends. If it's private housing, it's usually not a matter for us. But we are getting complaints about council inaction from previous floods.
Yeah.
And there may be a role for us there. So again, we apply a reasonableness test. Are there things the council should have done that they didn't do?
Yes.
That might have prevented some of these things? I don't know the answer to that. But if if the complaint is about the council as opposed to your private rental or some other entity that we don't investigate, then by all means give my office a call and we'll see. The other area we do look, of course, is in public housing. So if your mould problem or the maintenance issue is in a public housing property, that's absolutely something the Ombudsman can look into.
So you are investigating allegations of inaction by councils in relation to the way this flood event has been managed?
We are getting some complaints about council inaction, and I would encourage, if people are concerned and they can point to instances where something has been promised and not happened following previous floods, then, and you're not getting any response. But this also helps us understand the themes and trends. So, we don't know what's going wrong out there in regional Victoria unless you tell us about it. So if we get a number of complaints that are pointing us in the direction of a particular theme, that allows us to understand the problem much better. So again, I'd encourage all of your listeners who may have concerns about this, who think that the council should have done something and haven't, and they've complained to the council about it and not getting anywhere, let us know.
Do they appear to have validity?
I really don't know. I mean, this is
too
where
early?
It is too early to tell. I mean, I have to be really careful not to jump to conclusions on the information I get on from one side when we have a chat. But certainly, I have a sense there is something worth looking into, and this seems to me something that we would want to ask some questions about.
Martin is in East Gippsland. Martin, you're through to Deb Glass, the Ombudsman.
Hello, Martin.
Hi there. My call is related to a non-compliant V-line bus stop. The bus stop itself should comply with the Vic Roads standards, and the eastbound bus actually has to stop in the turning lane off the Princess Highway to let passengers off, and it is not lit either. But irrespective of that, I've actually met Vic Roads on site. We've measured the situation with a tape measure, and they've agreed that it's not compliant, but they've done nothing about it. And the Department of Transport has nothing in their plans to do anything about that bus stop either.
Well, I think you can complain to the Ombudsman about that.
Thank you.
So, give us a call and talk us through the problem, and we might just take that up.
Is that the turn being non-compliant, does that make it a dangerous piece of roadway, Martin?
That's the right question to ask. The minimum width outside of the fog line, the white line that's on your left when you're driving down the Princess Highway, should be 3 metres for a bus stop. And the bus stop on the opposite side of the highway, directly opposite, is compliant, but this one is only 1.7 metres wide, so therefore the bus has to pull up. It has no choice but to pull up in the turning lane off the Princess Highway.
Right. Well, if you've complained about this and they've done nothing, that's certainly something that my office can look into, so give us a call.
Thank you very much.
Martin, can you ring Deborah Glass's office on 1800 806 314?
I'll do that. Thank you very much.
1300 303 468. We've got time for one more, although Danny in Heathcote, I've got a feeling in my water that this might be about private health insurance. Nonetheless, Danny, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Nicole. It is about private health insurance. I received an email last week from my private health saying that they want to reimburse me a sum of money over the COVID period, and for me to update my details.
Right.
Now,
so, Deborah Glass, I don't think that this is your jurisdiction.
It's not. I'm really sorry, Danny. We don't deal with private health insurance. So I suggest you complain to your private health provider and follow that. They should have a complaints process. So I would follow that process. But
is there an ombudsman for private health insurance?
I'm just trying to think whether the Commonwealth Ombudsman plays some role in there, but I'm not sure. I would I'd follow their process. If in doubt, you can always ring my office and we'll point you in the right direction. But I can tell you that we don't deal with private health.
Would the Health
insurance.
Services Commissioner be the appropriate?
I wouldn't think so. No.
Okay. So, Danny, got the wrong ombudsman, but Deborah's
the office will still try to help.
If you ring her office on 1800 806 314.
Well, got that down, Nicole. I'm a good kid.
You are a good kid, Danny. Thank you for ringing.
Thanks, Nicole. Thank you.
Deborah Glass, there has been increasing calls for a lemons ombudsman. That is, an ombudsman who can preside and make findings around dud cars. This just seems to be an exploding area of concern at the moment. People who drive their car out of a car yard and the next day it blows up and never works again.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Where are we at with that?
Well, I'm the government ombudsman, so I don't deal with dud cars, I'm afraid. and I've seen those calls for a
vehicle ombudsman.
Yeah, a used car ombudsman. Yeah. Consumer Affairs does have a responsibility there. Consumer Affairs Victoria, they do have a role under the... there's some legislation that gives them that responsibility. If I could sort of step back for a moment and say, I guess we should be flattered that everybody sees an ombudsman as the answer to their prayers, but it is actually much more complicated than that. So in my case, for example, I'm a government ombudsman. I deal with government agencies, including local councils and roads and everything else, but my recommendations aren't enforceable. They are very persuasive, and the reason 95% of my recommendations are accepted is because they are persuasive towards government entities. But when you're dealing with industry and used car dealers, you need to have some way of enforcing recommendations. So to create an ombudsman that actually makes enforceable recommendations over a whole bunch of used car dealers is a very, very difficult prospect. So I would say sounds great in principle, very, very hard to create in practice.
Deborah Glass, what has been the most outstanding moment of the last 12 months for you as we head towards Christmas?
I would have to say it was the Operation Watts report that I put out with IBAC in July of this year. It's the first joint investigation that my office has conducted with the Anti-Corruption Commission. I think it's probably the first of its joint investigation of its type anywhere in Australia. So I think just having the Ombudsman and the Anti-Corruption Commission work together as we did was a unique experience, which had its moments, as these things invariably do.
Yes.
But I'm particularly proud of the reform journey that I think we have embarked on as a result of that report. I mean, IBAC and I made a series of really major recommendations for parliamentary integrity reform. And they are obviously never going to be implemented in a matter of weeks or months, but the government has committed to them, accepted the recommendations.
The big one being?
A parliamentary integrity commissioner. That's
well, that's game-changing.
Absolutely game-changing. An independent parliamentary committee that is not controlled by the government of the day. Again, game-changing. So there codes and standards that are set within that should, I hope, give people much more confidence that in the integrity of their political leaders.
You're changing lives, changing the system, kicking goals.
It's been I think it's been a tough year for all of us, but I think what gets me up in the morning is the thought that we do make a difference every day to people's lives. I know we can't help everybody. I know people don't always have expectations that are realistic. I know that not everybody feels that we are able to do everything we should, but we have really wonderful, dedicated staff on the end of phones dealing with online complaints. And I can see the difference that we're able to make to people's lives, and that's why I love the job.
Well, thank you so much for coming into Ballarat and taking calls from regional Victorians.
It's a pleasure.
Have a wonderful, restful Christmas, and hopefully we can do it all again next year.
Absolutely looking forward to it, and the same to you and to all of your listeners. Have a wonderful festive season.